Major breaking news. The United States Supreme Court Justice Sotomayor, her bodyguards have been involved in a gunfight outside of her home. I'm happy to report that she is safe and the two U.S. Marshals protecting her were able to gun down and thwart a carjacking out front of Justice Sotomayor's home. Let's break this down when we come right back. Hey folks, I'm Mark Smith, host of the Four Boxes Diner, proud American gun owner, constitutional attorney, member of the United States Supreme Court Bar, and author of Israel Disarmed, What the 10/7 Terrorist Attacks by Hamas Teaches We Americans About the Right to Bear Arms. A lot of lessons in the book, Israel Disarmed. Find it on Amazon. All right, folks, major breaking news. It has just been reported that a gunman, a criminal, sought to carjack a car in front of the home of Supreme Court Justice Sotomayor. And the would-be carjacker has been gunned down, shot by two U.S. Marshals, by two deputy U.S. Marshals who were tasked with protecting the life and the home of Supreme Court Justice Sotomayor. Apparently, this criminal allegedly walked up to the cars in front of Justice Sotomayor's home and pointed a gun at the agents, and the agents opened fire and shot the would-be carjacker. They did recover the gun. This man was arrested and brought to a hospital with non-life-threatening injuries, so he will survive the alleged carjacker. But this, again, is not the first time that a Supreme Court justice has come under some danger, although this appears to be a violent carjacking in front of her home, and Justice Sotomayor, thank God, was not in the car or in the line of fire, but the two deputy U.S. Marshals were, and they were able to fend off using firearms, again, using guns, to protect the life of Justice Sotomayor. Now, it bears mentioning that Justice Sotomayor is anti-gun. No dispute about this. She does not believe that Heller was correctly decided. She does not believe that Bruin was correctly decided. And there would be literally no gun control law that Justice Sotomayor would not vote to uphold if she had the votes to go along with her on the U.S. Supreme Court. She is anti-gun. She talks all about gun violence. She is not the best Supreme Court justice ever, obviously, for a bunch of reasons we don't need to get into here. But the bottom line is she and her bodyguards, 24/7 bodyguards in the form of taxpayer-funded, I repeat, these deputy U.S. Marshals are funded by you and they're funded by me on taxpayer dime. You and I don't have the luxury, or at least most of us, maybe some of you watching, but most of us do not have the luxury of having 24/7 federal law enforcement protect ourselves, our families, our lives, our homes. We don't have that luxury, which is why, among other things, we need the right to keep and bear arms to protect ourselves. And this is another example of how an anti-gun Supreme Court justice in the form of Sotomayor benefits from armed men, benefits from firearms, and yet will she connect these dots between protecting herself, protecting the lives of law enforcement, protecting the lives of Americans? And law enforcement, of course, are not soldiers, they're civilians. Will she understand the connection between guns and saving lives and stopping bad people from doing bad things to good people? I doubt it, but she should, because it occurred literally feet from her front door. Now, I should also just mention, because, of course, here on the Four Boxes Diner, I want to make you the smartest person in the room. And beyond the fact that, obviously, this is another illustration of how you and I are our own first responder, because we don't have U.S. Marshals protecting our lives 24/7. Justice Sotomayor doesn't have to be her own first responder because she's got taxpayer-funded security to be a first responder for her using guns, which is exactly what happened today. But this is not the first time that a Supreme Court justice has been attacked. As you may recall, there was a man that was arrested who was seeking to assassinate Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh, and he was only thwarted because literally he picked up the phone and called 911 and said he was there to assassinate Brett Kavanaugh, and was, as a consequence of that, arrested. Obviously, he seems like he was a nut job, but nevertheless, that occurred just a couple years ago. Even before that, Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer, who's no longer a Supreme Court Justice, he stepped down. But keep in mind that Supreme Court Justice Breyer was terribly anti-gun. He was in the dissent in Heller, the dissent in McDonald, the dissent in Bruin, hates guns, anti-gun, a total elitist snob worth hundreds of millions of dollars. If you've ever been to Boston to see that tabernacle, that ode to the federal judiciary, which cost hundreds of millions of dollars, Stephen Breyer was largely behind that, pushing for that beautiful building, paid for, again, by the taxpayers there in Boston for the federal courthouse. That was largely the work of Stephen Breyer. Now, I should mention that I bring him up because he was literally back in 2012. You probably don't remember the story, but I do. He was robbed in his vacation home on the Caribbean island of Nevis. That's right. Have you ever been robbed on your vacation home in the Caribbean? I know I haven't. But anyway, Stephen Breyer was done so by a man wielding a machete. And yet this was back in 2012, and still Justice Breyer continued on being anti-gun, even though he was almost killed, and he was robbed by a man with a machete who easily could have just gone on and attacked him if that's what the terrible guy, the criminal in Nevis, wanted to do to Justice Breyer. And just as a side note, another Supreme Court justice that hated guns, David Souter, the former Supreme Court Justice David Souter from New Hampshire, live free or die, unless you're David Souter apparently. But back when he was on the court in 2004, before he dissented, because he was against Heller, he was against the Second Amendment in all respects, terrible, pathetic, terrible Supreme Court pick by the first George H.W. Bush. Terrible pick out in New Hampshire. Nevertheless, that was David Souter, terrible Supreme Court justice, but he was assaulted by a group of males in 2004 and beat up and robbed while he was jogging. Luckily, of course, his injuries were not terribly severe, but again, it's weird how these justices get robbed by machetes, get beat up by young men, or in the case of Justice Sotomayor, literally engaged, at risk of a carjacking in front of her very home. I wonder whether or not she's going to change her tune on guns, and I'm guessing the answer is no, because again, for the mindset of these justices that don't believe in the Second Amendment, the reality is they're elitist. They think that you're a peon, you're a peasant. They think that I'm a serf, and they think that we should just call the government up to have them protect us. But the reality is that is simply not an option, and that is not how free societies work. So nevertheless, breaking news. The good news is that the alleged criminal was thwarted in his attempt to engage in violence by the two deputy U.S. Marshals. That's good news. As to whether or not this is a lesson that that Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor is going to pick up on and alter her views on the Second Amendment, I'm guessing the answer is no. But again, hope springs eternal here at the Four Boxes Diner Second Amendment channel. All right, folks, so there you have it. Hope you learned something here today. Make sure you subscribe to this channel. Make sure you follow me on X for more and more Second Amendment and political information at Four Boxes Diner. That's the handle, at Four Boxes Diner. Check out my book, Israel Disarmed, on Amazon, and we will talk to you again very soon here at the Four Boxes Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.